welcome to Breaking Legal News. I'm your host, David Adler, and today we're covering one of the most important Supreme Court decisions involving freedom of the press. New York Times Company versus the United States, decided in 1971. This case, often referred to as the Pentagon Papers case, involved a major conflict between the U.S. government and the press over the publication of secret documents about the Vietnam War. The government argued that releasing these documents would threaten national security, while newspapers argued that the First Amendment protected their right to inform the public. Tonight, we'll break down the facts of this case, the constitutional issue, the Supreme Court's decision, and why this case still matters today. Let's start with what actually happened. We now go to our field reporter for the background of the case.
Thanks, David. This case began when a classified government study about the Vietnam War was leaked to the press. These documents became known as the Pentagon Papers, and they revealed how the U.S. government made decisions during the war, many of which had not been fully disclosed to the public. The New York Times and later the Washington Post began publishing articles based on these documents. As more information came out, it became clear that the government had not always been fully honest with the public about the progress of the war. In response, the U.S. government took legal action to stop the newspapers from continuing publication. Officials argued that releasing the information could harm national security and damage foreign relations. The government asked the courts to issue an order called an injunction to prevent further publication. This led to a major legal battle between the government and the press. Now let's take a closer look at the constitutional issue at the center of this case. Luke, back to you.
Thank you, Alex. The key issue in this case involves the First Amendment and the concept known as prior restraints. Prior restraints occur when the government tries to stop speech or publication before it happens. The question is, does the government have the power to prevent newspapers from publishing classified information in order to protect national security? On one side, the newspaper argues that the First Amendment protects freedom of press and publication. That means that the newspaper would have the right to publish on what the government is doing. On the other side, the government argues that publishing the Pentagon's papers could pose a serious threat to the safety of the nation. This case forced the Supreme Court to balance between two important ideas: national security and freedom of the press. And let's now look at how the Supreme Court ruled. Back to our Supreme Court reporter.
Thank you, Luke. In a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the newspapers. The court held that the government did not meet the very heavy burden required to justify stopping publication. According to the Central Hudson test for commercial speech, the justices explained that prior restraints on the press are almost always unconstitutional under the First Amendment, since the Founding Fathers are thought to have originally intended to prevent censorship/control from happening. Even though the government argued that publication could harm national security, the court found that it did not provide enough evidence to prove that the danger was severe enough to justify censorship. Thus, the New York Times and the Washington Post were allowed to continue publishing the Pentagon Papers. Several justices were concurring opinions emphasized that the free press is essential to democracy and must be protected, especially Justice Black, who stated, in quotes, "In my view, far from deserving condemnation for their courageous reporting, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and other newspapers should be commended for serving the purpose that the Founding Fathers saw so clearly." End quote. However, in dissent, some justices argued that the case was decided too quickly and that the potential risks to national security were not fully considered. Overall, the ruling strongly reinforced protections from freedom of press. However, this case can still show some relevancy to our lives now, concerning how free speech is used, both in an individual sense and business perspective. Back to our analyst.
Thank you. The decision in New York Times versus the United States is one of the most important Supreme cases that involve freedom of the press. It set a strong standard to make it extremely difficult for the government to censor the media before its publication. The ruling has enforced the idea that having free press is essential for keeping the public informed and holding lawmakers accountable. This case had a major impact at the time, increasing public debate and doubt about government transparency. This case involves discussions about journalism, government secrecy, and whistleblowers. It connects to recent affairs involving leaked information and debates over whether or not the public has a right to know about private government actions. Ultimately, this case shows how powerful the First Amendment is is for protecting freedom of the press, even in situations involving national security.
Back to the studio.
Thank you. New York Times Company versus United States remains a cornerstone of constitutional law and press freedom in the United States. It continues to shape the relationship between government power and rights of the media today. Thank you for watching Breaking Legal News.